Accessible transit, streets, and crosswalks that work for strollers and walkers, opportunities to gather and build community regardless of economic means. Those are but a few of the ideas that contribute to city building for people at every stage of their lives. And they're not just ideas, they're already happening right here in Ontario. Let's find out more from Jeff Leman, Mayor of Barrie, Ontario, and Gwen Kavanagh, Chair of the Barrie and Area Chapter Number 6 of CARP, a national nonprofit that advocates on behalf of adults 45 and over. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you here and to speak about the great city of Barrie, Ontario. So making Barrie an age-friendly city has been something that you've been working on for a while, Mayor. Yeah. Why was this an important initiative for you to pursue?
Well, first of all, we know that Ontario society, Canadian society, is aging in general. The demographic over 65 is getting much larger as a percentage of our population. But I think also for a growing city like Barrie, as we get bigger, we want to make sure we're considering the unique needs of people at different ages of their life and not just taking a sort of one-size-fits-all approach to city building, to delivering our programs, to delivering our services. I guess I feel that when we're delivering our services, all too often we tend to try and reduce things to the single lowest common denominator in many cases, and not really put the lens on services that allows us to understand what will work best for people at different ages, different economic circumstances. So yeah, this was something I was sort of passionate about. It started with a summit in 2012, I believe. It evolved into a committee of council that actually has status in the city council process, and then ultimately in the years following to our age-friendly plan, and now rolling out with 60 different initiatives in the city.
Are there many seniors in Barrie?
Yes, there are. Now, we actually have one of the youngest populations in Ontario. We're a very, very family-oriented city. I think that was part of the reason I wanted to do this as well, because that is changing. And I didn't want, in a way, our assumptions around our community to get in the way of really doing things differently as we got a lot bigger. And of course, the other thing is, Barrie is growing very, very quickly. So the sheer numbers of people accessing our services and the opportunity for us to design new communities is always there.
We've been using this term age-friendly a couple of times, but what does an age-friendly city look like?
Well, age-friendly really refers to all age groups. Now, I think in a lot of cases it puts a focus on seniors and older demographics, but the concept is basically that you would take it's a lens. It's a way of thinking as you build a community that does say that different age groups need different things, different times of their lives, in different parts of the city and according to different services. So, you know, often when we plan things in the city, we do it in silos according to services. Here's the rec plan, here's the fire plan, here's the road plan, the transit plan. And this cuts across, right? It says that kids are going to need things at in different ways. Seniors are going to need things in different ways. And we can put services and facilities and places and programs together to meet those unique needs.
And this has been a collaboration of sorts with Gwen.
Has.
How did you help make Barrie an age-friendly city?
Well, initially in 2013, we approached the mayor about starting a senior advisory committee to the city, which he agreed to. And then we set about deciding what we needed, where we had to start. And that came into getting the right questions and doing polls, sending them out, finding what the people actually wanted. I think we got about 1,000 responses eventually, and the city collated those. And then we got a grant for $50,000 and hired a consultant, and then went through that whole process. And then we sort of handed it back to the city.
Well, was the mayor a good listener?
Absolutely.
And what did you find that people wanted?
They want to be able to walk safely, whether it's in the wintertime or the summer. They want civic participation. They want, I guess, to be able to have a life and not just be stuck in their homes.
To feel included. Your plan to make Barrie a community that's accessible for all ages has 60 strategies in 60 different areas. What are those 6 areas, Mayor?
Yeah, the 6 areas, some might be what you'd expect: transportation, housing, and health. And obviously those are 3 areas of service delivery that affect everybody's daily life. Some of the other ones are kind of interesting. Public spaces
Meaning like parks or?
Yeah, absolutely, streets. And remembering that with a lens, this is little things and really big things. So within each of these categories, we can be talking about relatively minor or small interventions in the way we do things, right up to sweeping changes or new facilities or programs. The other two were really about community involvement and engagement, and that surrounded recreation programming and community programming that was tailored to different age groups, and an inclusive community where we combated issues like isolation, low income, providing services for lower income seniors so that they could fully participate in both city programs and in civic life.
And something that, you know, for someone who maybe not experiencing that particular situation, a crosswalk might not be something you think about.
Sure.
But why is that important to think about when you're creating a city that's accessible for all, Gwen?
Well, the curbs, having the curbs that will use a walker or something. Just simple little things, like having a grab bar in the right place. It's the simple little things that can make a big difference.
And how did you address that as a mayor?
Well, I'll give you a small example. So we looked at areas of the city where we knew there were a lot more seniors that walked, just parts of the city because there was a large seniors community or the demographic in the neighborhood was older. And we adjusted the walk time on the pedestrian signals at intersections. So, you know, that one-size-fits-all approach says, here's the average walking time for all human beings, right? And that's 1.1 meters a second for interest. So we set our walk signals to allow for somebody walking at that speed to get across the street. But of course, somebody walks slower, has a walker, needs a bit more time. So in those certain areas of the city, we actually adjusted the time so that it's easier to get across the street. And it's a little thing because, you know, if you get partway across and the light goes red, it becomes very stressful. It can increase the chance of a fall.
Because you're trying to rush to cross, right?
Exactly right. And it is a 4-season climate in Barrie. And, you know, given the different weather conditions as well, we want to try and make sure that everybody's safe.
And what about bus routes, Gwen? Oh, did you want to add something?
Well, I was just going to say women with strollers and young children,
Sure.
too, they need a little extra time.
Absolutely.
Besides crosswalks, what are some other initiatives that were changed?
Well, the buses, too, making them, the steps, everything, that will make it more convenient. I guess the routes, too. I know we've made a lot of changes to the routes.
How would changing a route make a city more age-friendly?
Shorter walking time to get to a bus stop. So that, again, is easier for anybody who is, you know, whether it's the mom with strollers and a bunch of kids trying to get them all to the local bus stop and then get on the bus. And then handle the stroller on the bus, or whether we're talking about an older demographic. So whenever you increase service and put buses closer to the kind of destinations people are going to and just add more bus stops and more service, you're providing an opportunity to use transit more easily. And then the other big piece is specialized transit. So we have quite a large paratranspo system called BAX. We bought some new vehicles, which actually look like sort of a blown up Mini Cooper. They're really cool. They're not the traditional cutaway bus. They're a lot closer to the ground, a lot more comfortable to ride in, a bit more modern, and a little more agile. So they just get around a lot easier.
I know one the criticisms that I've heard from people in my community when it comes to the TTC, or even like if you live outside of Toronto in the GTA, if you need accessible transit, it takes a very long time. You can't really plan your day, but it seems to me that you're saying that you actually created more services in that department. How are you doing this? Where are you getting the money to do this? Because I think that's one of the things that
Great
they say
question.
they can't do it for TTC.
Yeah, great question. And I have to preface this by saying we're not there yet. I mean, Gwen, and I think knows we continue to try and meet the needs of everybody, but it's still sometimes a struggle with the service, and there are wait times. However, those wait times have got a lot better, and the service has expanded, to answer your question, in part because the federal government. The federal government invested in the Public Transit Investment Fund, PTIF, which has allowed us to buy more fleet. And we actually had that announcement in Barrie a few years ago, and that's, for a city like Barrie, when you get capital, you know, we don't have subways. So when you're getting a check for capital dollars, that's almost all going into fleet. And what we chose to do with it was invest heavily in our specialized transit, as well as the conventional fleet expansion we were talking about.
And another issue that was dominated the last provincial election was affordable housing and how a lot of young people don't have access to the market anymore. But affordable housing also affects seniors. Gwen, in what way?
Well, isolation, for one thing. A lot of people are in big houses. Their mate has died, they're living in a 4 or 5 bedroom home. And can they look after repairs, maintenance? They might not want to move, but really they need to. There was a rather startling statistic from one of my chairs in Halifax. They just did a mental health day. Over 20% of senior men living alone commit suicide. And the women were almost as much. So trying to find a suitable housing, not everybody can afford or wants to go into retirement home. So just coming up with alternatives. We had a hackathon from the city and the real estate board, and we talked about many things. My chapter has been focused on one thing, co-housing.
Co-housing, what is that?
That is either a rebuild or a new build, where you put 4, 5, or 6 people in the same house. They have a suite each, which consists of a bedroom, a bathroom, and a sitting room, and all the rest is common area. So we have a new one, just started in Barrie. Beautiful big house. It allows you to live in $1 million house.
But the idea is that you split the mortgage with 4 people or 5 people?
Well, they're going to buy in. They're seniors, they probably have a house to sell. They'll buy in. They'll own as tenants in common. They'll own their own suite, which you can sell on MLS, and they'll own 1/5 of the common area because there will be 5 suites in this house. They'll split all the costs, which is a great advantage. The property taxes will be on a formula because not all the suites are exactly the same size because it's a rebuild. In a new build, they'd be the same size.
And what are some of the advantages of living in an environment like that for seniors?
Well, think of the Golden Girls.
I love that show. I still watch it.
So that would be a level 1.
Right.
Yeah.
Where they come in and they share the costs, and if you want to travel, you pick up and leave, right? You don't have to worry about anything. The other thing is if you have a fall or something goes wrong, there's always somebody around. If you want somebody to go walk, there's somebody to go for a walk with. You eat healthier, it does away with elder abuse. There's all kinds of things that happen in such an environment. And that's a level 1. And then if you become a level 2, maybe you need some help. So again, you're splitting that. So if you're paying somebody $25 an hour and there's 5 of you, it's really $5 an hour. And then on a level 3, they'd want help every day. Now, I'm not talking nursing, like it would be household, plus maybe monitoring their medication or something. And then if they need actual personal care, they would hire somebody to come in on their own dime.
And it sounds like it's kind of like you have a built-in community in your own home.
They become their own family. And there's a very rigorous process to put the right people together because that's important.
Right. I was going to ask, some people might be a bit nervous about living with strangers.
That's right. So it's at least 150 questions. Your family gets involved. They will go out and visit your house beforehand because they want to make sure you're not a hoarder, for instance. There's all kinds of things. And then I think what makes it work is property management because there's a monthly meeting and you get a statement of all the expenses and you get to have your input, and if there are any problems, they're settled. And not that they're big. I know in my friend's case, her father was, everybody was using his coffee mug and he didn't like that. But she just went out and bought all the same mugs and that solved that problem.
Very diplomatic.
Yes. So, nothing's allowed to build and it works.
Well, where would you come in then as mayor, as the city of Barrie, to support an initiative like this?
Well, interestingly, co-housing was something that our building department wasn't really sure how to handle. It's under the Ontario Building Code. It falls in between a few things that we're used to. So that took a bit of education, and Gwen was tremendous on this, as were the developers of the first one that's opening up in Barrie now. Just in terms of those common areas, and does it require extra fire ratings? Because of the intended tenants, do we need any additional accessibility measures? And at the same time, as a municipality, we should always be aware that whenever we require something more, it costs something, and that cost gets passed along to people who, we're trying to create more affordable
Like property
housing
tax?
options. Well, not just property tax, but the cost of the renovations to turn it into a co-housing development. So I mean, there's a balance in there, but generally as well, I just would like to support these kinds of initiatives because I think it's a great place for people to live. And this fits right into an existing neighborhood. I mean, you can take a large house and convert it to this form of housing.
Well, some seniors are lucky enough to have a big, beautiful home, and because they bought it a very long time ago, it was a lot cheaper back then. But property taxes are still going up.
Yeah.
So how do you address that?
So we're the only, as far as we know, the only city in Ontario where you can freeze your property taxes once you hit age 65. So it's very, very unique. What we allow you to do is then accrue the increases, and then you pay them when you sell your home.
Has that always been like that in Barrie?
No,
Or is
we
that something-
introduced that about, actually that one predates the plan. We did introduce that about 8, 9 years ago. So the idea there is to ensure that nobody's ever taxed out of their home. And it was interesting because that actually also predated the huge run up in housing prices. Just for context, Barrie's average house price doubled in 3 years over the last 4 years, and it's cooled off in the last about 12 months. But just an enormous run up in the price of housing, and we have the 4th highest rent in the entire country. So Toronto, Vancouver, I believe it's Ottawa, and then Barrie, which is very unusual for a medium-sized city, and it really reflects a shortage of rental supply. It's a supply and demand problem. We're growing fast. Lots of people want to move here, which is a wonderful thing. But the challenge is there's very little rental housing.
Well, with the, sorry?
So I was just going to say the co-housing works there too, because
Yeah.
we're taking 5 people and putting them in one house. It frees up 4 units, because supply and demand is what happened with the vacancy rate.
Yes, exactly.
And just to take it back to the property tax for a second,
sure.
You freeze it, but what happens if, do you ever get it back, or what
Yes.
happens if somebody passes
so
away?
we accrue it. We keep track. And then when you sell your house or move out or the house changes hands for whatever reason, at that point it is paid to the city. So it's accrued.
Is there interest compounding on that?
No, we do that interest free.
I'm wondering, why don't other cities do that?
Well, because if you have a lot of people on that program, you start to affect the city's cash flow. Obviously, if you had a huge chunk of the whole community that wasn't paying the increases year after year, the city's not going to receive it. So it's
Because I can
not-
just hear people packing up from Toronto and
For
moving to
sure.
Barrie, right?
Yeah. And I mean, we've had a good uptake on it, but not an enormous uptake. So we're able to manage that fiscal amount. And there's a gap, right? Because once you introduce it, you've got a bunch of people that go on it, and they don't start that process of selling and paying it back. But once they do, it all comes out in the wash. And to me, it's the least we can do for people who have paid taxes their entire life, are now not using probably as many services as many others. And the city still ends up getting our money eventually.
Eventually, right.
Yeah,
So it's not
that's
an
right.
altruistic thing.
Well, I
'Cause in
think
the
it
end,
is
you
in
do
the
get the
sense
money,
that
right?
it helps people age at home and stay in their home because they've worked their whole life for their house and they've raised their family there and they may not want to leave. And if we can, just because the property taxes got too high, that's a terrible reason to have to leave your house, right?
Gwen, what do you hope that other cities learn from what Barrie is doing?
I think it's a great initiative, and I think it's really just taking the time to sit down and think things through, and also approaching the population, getting their input, because I don't really know what a millennial wants. I don't. And the millennial might not know what I want. So I think it's actually going out and talking to people and getting their input. I think that's what's necessary.
It's not a
Communication.
one-size-fits-all.
No, it's communication, civic participation.
And do you think people are learning from what you're doing, Mayor?
Well, I hope so. I mean, I think we've learned a lot. And I think that's one of the things that I've noticed in the time that I've been mayor, even within our own organization, is people are starting to apply that lens. I'm seeing as new rec programs are developed or there's new approaches to building something that we're thinking about things that we weren't before. And Gwen's absolutely right. That goes back to the fact that we started this with a survey of 1,000 people. And surveys are surveys, but there was real engagement from that. I mean, when you read our plan, which is online, there is a lot of detail. People really told us what needs to change and what they would like to see and what the priorities should be. And I think the core is exactly what Gwen says. If you take the time to do that, That's really the critical first step. And then the second thing, I think, is having her committee, the committee that Gwen is part of, the Seniors Advisory Committee, to make sure we're doing it. Because that you need something to hold the feet to the fire so that you don't forget, you don't start to let it fade or sit on a shelf.
And because your city is an age-friendly city for all age groups, has there been a similar interest to have a similar partnership with you for millennials?
So interestingly, we won an award a year ago for being a youth-friendly city as well. There has been a real initiative to be age-friendly when it comes to particularly youth. We don't sort of talk about millennials so much as teenagers through to early 20s, and we've been really trying to target our programming on that front as well. There's been great work done by the YMCA in Barrie. They've been providing a lot of leadership on this front and pulling together a lot of the organizations that do serve youth in our community.
What have you learned from this process yourself?
Well, I would start by talking to people, and I would also say that I was pleasantly surprised, by the impact of relatively small initiatives. I mean, it's easy to say, well, one co-housing development's only 5 units. That has huge impact, though, because the impact is it shows people a new way of doing things, and the impact is it provides a cultural change within government that says, here's a new way of approaching delivering services, that cutting across departments. So now I'm seeing, my transit department, my rec department, without council doing anything, or actually I don't think the committee doing anything, got together to create a new program. And I think that's the way government should work. And it does go back in the beginning to the culture that says we're going to be willing to try something new, even if it doesn't work.
And Gwen, for you too, I'm thinking that that you sometimes it's very easy to think that your voice doesn't matter, but for you to be in a position where you are making life better for so many other seniors, what does it mean for you to be part of this and to see the change that's happening that you've made, that you've been a part of?
Well, it's certainly changed me from the time I started the CARP chapter to now, which is about 9 years ago, and the focus. And I really think we need to put the different age groups together, not separate them. I think with people moving out to the suburbs, it got away from families. Now there's the next door teenager babysitting instead of grandma. I just think we need to bring some of those mixtures back together because we can all help one another.
And the skeptic in me, Jeff,
Sure.
thinks that you're a politician. Yeah. Seniors are a huge voting bloc.
Sure.
What you're doing, is this a political move?
Right. Well, you're not wrong that seniors are very engaged in our community, but I actually don't think they've had the voice in the process. That's where this all came from to begin with, and so. After elections, after all the politicking, we now have 4-year terms as local politicians, and it's about actually shaping programs and services. So, no, I think the really amazing thing for me was to see the way that the community itself responded and linked into the organization. What's most rewarding about being in local government is that you can affect change very quickly and see it out in the community. It's practical. We always say there's no liberal or conservative way to snowplow a road. It either gets plowed or it doesn't, right? So I would like to think it was much more pragmatic than political in the sense that when we go to do these things, yes, there are the fine words around we're gonna engage seniors more, they matter, and those sorts of things that can get said in the political process. But if you don't then deliver on that, then it's just empty words, and plans can go on shelves. So I think the really rewarding thing about this, as we've gone through the process, has been that by virtue of the committee and by virtue of the little interventions, we're starting to see the impact out in the community, and then we get recognized for it with an award. Which
well, yes. So I was going to, and with that, this past spring, you received the 2018 Ontario Age-Friendly Community Recognition Award. What does that mean for you, both personally and for the city, Gwen?
It was a good moment for me because just that meeting originally with Jeff Tass to have the Senior Advisory Committee, it was a realization that one person can make a little bit of a difference. It was emotional. It was.
And for you?
Well, obviously, it's a point of pride for the city. I also like it when, because a lot of people think of us as a suburban municipality, right? We're sort of a medium-sized city in the outer ring of the GTA. I love it when we do stuff like this, and that sort of says, look, here's Barrie doing things quite differently, and trying to show a bit of a leadership role. And I don't think people necessarily expect it of Barrie, because it's not what first comes to mind as like a retirement community in Ontario. And I think that's a piece that was really nice to hear.
And that's the other thing, maybe the long-term care. I mean, there's such a waiting list for long-term care, and we have to come up with other ways of handling it. And I read an article one of my board members sent to me yesterday, and it was about one of the Peel long-term homes, and they're doing what they call a butterfly home. They brought somebody in from England to tell them what that was, and they spent a year doing it. You'll have to look it up. It was so great, because they took people that were basically with different stages of dementia, which 1 in 3 of us are going to get apparently, and some of them were nonverbal and just shuffling through life with nothing, glazed eyes. So what they did was they painted bright colors, and they put in plush dogs and feathers and fans, and they took the staff and they trained them to do things emotionally rather than physical. So you don't just go in and change a diaper and make a rigid rule that they have to eat breakfast at 8 and they have to be here at 8:30, and then they spend the rest of their day in a room. So they engaged them, and it was amazing. And I think Peel is now going to take this to some of their other homes.
Yeah, they
so
are.
Just
that story's
things.
making its way around Facebook now.
Yeah,
great
I
thing.
read it, and I was so pleased, because, yes, I don't want to be warehoused. I don't want to be put in a place with 32 other people and no communication or whatever. Because if you haven't got family coming to visit you every day.
It's isolating.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for showing us what a small but mighty city can do in changing our attitudes around having age-friendly cities. It's been a pleasure to have you both here.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Nan.
for having us on.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Yes.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.